Anytime you play a historical game as the UK in HOI4, this decision pops up. Bulgaria asks you for permission to rearm, and you're given three choices. You can say no, you can say yes with a condition, or you can give an unrestricted yes. Now, with this decision, you think that it would impact the way the rest of the game will be played, but in fact, it doesn't, which is kind of frustrating. Let's take a look at the Bulgarian focus tree. So early game, they go the monarchist path, power to the Tsar, and then the Tsar's regime. The focus they do to ask you for permission to rearm is this one right here, negotiate Bulgarian rearmament. That gives them some decisions, and eventually one of the decisions causes this to pop up. Now, if Bulgaria is playing a historical game, it's going to go from power to the Tsar's regime, down to promote Bulgarian nationalism, to Bulgarian irredentism, all the way down here to join the tripartite pact. Pretty late in the game, they join the Axis. But at this point in a historical game, there's other parts of the tree that are still open. They don't necessarily have to go fascist. They don't have to join the Axis. In fact, they still have the ability to either do join the Allies or fade of the Balkans, depending on the choices they choose up here. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know that much about interwar Balkan politics. But you would think as the UK, my decision here would set Bulgaria on a trajectory of going down any one of these three paths. For example, if I click they're just offering empty promises and I slam the door in their face, then it would make sense that they go and cozy up next to the Germans and join the Axis. If I click this decision, it requires that they do a non-aggression pact with some of their neighbors, and then we will allow them to start to rearm. That to me sounds pretty close to this fate of the Balkans focus, where you can either puppet or align the Balkan nations next to you. Or shoot, what if we go ahead and just end the restrictions altogether and let them rearm? That in my mind should set them on the trajectory to eventually approach us later on and then join the Allies. But if you're playing a historical game, alas, this means nothing. None of the decisions you make here will change anything about the way Bulgaria plays the game. If you're playing a game as Germany, there's a focus you can take that sends both the United Kingdom and France a decision that does not matter. I'm referring, of course, to Demand Sudetenland. In a historical game, both before the newest update and after, the UK and France will always say yes to your demands for Sudetenland. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, that makes sense because it's a historical game and historically that's what happened. But the other night I played a game as Germany and I decided to manually justify against Poland and then go to war with the Soviet Union. It was like 1939 and basically all of this was conquered. And guess what? When I did demand Sudetenland, sure enough, they handed it over despite world tension being at 100%. And speaking of diplomatic decisions, here's one that the Germans can get. If Hungary plays a historical game, they'll eventually get down to here where they can reaffirm their territorial claims and then demand Transylvania. Now, in every game I've ever played as Hungary, regardless what happens, Romania always says no. It doesn't matter if I'm in a faction and have an army that's 10 times bigger than them. They do not hand over Transylvania. So this cues a series of events. You'll say they went too far this time. Then you get this decision where you get to choose a mediator. Now, in a historical playthrough, Hungary is always going to choose Germany. So we'll click them. Now, when this decision pops up for Germany, they're going to say, yes, we'll go ahead. We'll negotiate for them. Then it'll ask you how you want to realign. And usually Romania accepts whatever you give them. Now, let's just say you're playing as Germany and you decide you like Romania quite a bit. So you'll say Transylvania stays with Romania. If you're playing a historical game with Hungary, nothing changes. You don't have to give them jack diddly squat, and they will still join the Axis every time. You would think after being rejected by Hitler's demands that the Hungarians wouldn't be so apt to go crawl back over towards the German Reich. But they do, every single game. The diplomatic feature does not matter. Historically, Hitler's diplomatic efforts were very calculated. Now, in our timeline, Germany allowed the Hungarians to take northern Transylvania, while southern Transylvania stayed with Romania. But under the game's logic, there's no reason why you would choose any one of those three options. Regardless what you do in a historical game, both Romania and Hungary will join the Axis. The reason why Hitler settled for only northern Transylvania going to Hungary is because he still wanted to have an opportunity to woo Romania to join the Axis powers. Romania gets carved up by Hungary and Bulgaria so that Hitler can align both these countries into his faction. Now, as a player, this really doesn't matter, though, because you don't need to do any diplomacy. It doesn't matter. Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, regardless what you do over here, will not change the fact that they will join the Axis. But historically, that wasn't the case. Hitler felt like he had to juggle the interests of these nations. Hitler was competing with the influence of the Allied powers. He was competing with the influence of the Italians. In some ways, he was competing with the influences of the Soviet Union. But in this game, there is no penalty nor any reward for going off script. And that's probably why, as a player, you have never done the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Because there's no penalty for doing it. Why would I give up free Polish territory? Why would I give up territory I'm just going to go conquer again later? That doesn't make any sense to me as a player. But historically, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was deeply important. Hitler knew that if he went to war with Poland, the Allies were going to answer and declare war on Germany. Hitler did not want to fight a two-front war. Molotov-Ribbentrop and the non-aggression pact that accompanied it allowed the German army to focus all its attention over here in the West. In fact, shortly before Molotov-Ribbentrop was signed, Stalin actually cabled over to the United Kingdom and said, hey, I don't think the Germans are up to any good. I think they're about to invade Poland. Stalin said the Poles should give us military access so we can defend them because we don't want a repeat of World War I. To that, the British said no for two reasons. One, because they didn't believe they could trust the communists. And two, they believed, probably accurately, that if Soviet troops went into Poland, they would never leave. Now, if you're playing a game as the Soviet Union, you kind of have this dynamic available to you. If you're playing a historical game, this usually gets bypassed. But if you rush down Baltic security and go down to claims in Poland, if you offer Poland protection, you get to have those Eastern Polish states in exchange for the Poles being guaranteed by you, and then the Poles getting claims on all this territory. That is the territory they would eventually annex after World War II. But overall, as a player for Germany, there's no reason to do that focus. There's no reason to do any diplomatic measures. Because regardless what diplomatic actions you take on a historical game, all the nations will follow their quote-unquote historical paths. As an aside, one thing they did fix about Italy that I like is historically, Italy did guarantee the independence of Austria. And then they just backed out on it when it was clear that the British and the French weren't going to help. And historically, they also did sign the Pact of Steel. Now Austria sends Italy a decision where they can guarantee them, and so you can have your cake and eat it too. Much like what I said with Bulgaria, that depending on the UK's decision, I would love to see Bulgaria change course. I would love to see the game punish the player if they don't do diplomacy well. For example, I would love the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact actually to trigger a sequence of events. Let's keep it historical. The first event goes to the Soviet Union, where it tells them the stipulations of what's being offered. At that point, the Soviet player can either accept Molotov-Ribbentrop, reject it, or ask to join the Allies like they did in our time. Then the decision gets kicked over to the UK, where the UK can agree to give up these territories to the Soviet Union in exchange for the Soviets joining the Allies. Now, if you're playing a historical game, then the UK would always say no because we can't trust those commies. But let's just say you're playing as the UK and you say, yes, go ahead, yes, you can have those Belarusian and Ukrainian territories you lost in the Polish-Soviet War back, and you can join the Allies. Then the decision would kick over to Poland, and Poland either has to accept the stipulations that the British give them and give up their eastern territories to the Soviet Union, or they're basically on their own. And I imagine if they're on their own, they would give up Danzig. This, I think, would add so many levels of replayability. So that's the first thing I would fix about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The second thing I would do, if the player does not do this, and they go ahead and conquer all of Poland, I think it would be neat that the Soviet Union gets a decision. The Soviet Union would get an event, something like Ukrainian and Belarusian refugees beg for our protection. The Soviet Union at that point can either declare a war of liberation against the Germans or just ignore it. Now, historically, they probably would have just ignored that because they weren't ready for that war and they were about to go after Finland. But who knows? I think even if there was just a 20% chance that the Russians attack the Germans if they don't do Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, would greatly affect the way players play the game and that they would be more willing to consider signing Molotov-Ribbentrop. I think these things need to be in the game because the game is supposed to simulate not just the technology and tactics of World War II, but the geopolitics as well. And there are so many elements of geopolitics in this game, or as you might call it, and I rightfully call it LARP, but that's the fun of the game, is the LARP. Unless you're LARPing for certain reasons. But right now, overall, the majority of diplomatic decisions you make in this game are completely worthless. I would love to see the interwar diplomatic efforts of Germany really affecting the way these nations align. For example, I think First Vienna Award should be optional. If you're Germany and you just annex or puppet all of Czechoslovakia and don't give any reward to the Hungarians, I think there should be a good chance the Hungarians align with the Italians. And when they align with the Italians, maybe instead of going Pact of Steel, there's a better chance that Italy goes ahead and goes over here to Italy first and forms their own faction. I just want the historical stuff in the game to matter the way it mattered historically.